Hi everybody, I'm Cedric. I'm going to try and tie together for you today two things that, big words, and maybe they don't make a lot of sense, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll see the connection. So the first word is biophilia. What does it mean? So biophilia is love of nature, love of life. And if I just tell you a little bit about statistics here, it takes about 4,000 generations to enact a genetic change in a human being. So how many, if that's 30 years, it's 100 per generation, it's 120,000 years. So we live in a world where we were adapted, 120,000 years ago we were adapted to this world, and we're now living in a very, very different world than we were 120,000 years ago. No fire, no light, no computers, no schools, no Brentwood, none of this. So who we are deep inside of ourselves is very different from how we live nowadays. And so understanding that disconnect is really important. I don't have to explain climate change to any of you. I think we're all aware of it. Greenhouse gases, the effect of CO2 on our environment. It's also a very critical part of what I do every day, is thinking about how we can implement different kinds of architecture to start to tackle that issue of climate change. I'm an architect. I mentioned this a few times. Here's some projects that I do. Single-family houses, renovations, commercial buildings, even way up north in Fort St. John, factories, and cabins in Whistler. I have a lot of fun in what I do. One of the things we're trained as architects to do is really understand human nature and how people want to live and how they inhabit the spaces they live in. We kind of tap into sort of biophilia in a sort of an intuitive way. It takes years and years. So if any of you are thinking about becoming architects, it's at least 12 years of training once you leave high school. And then you do your internship, and then you start to practice. And it takes about 20 years before you actually become, well, before I actually became kind of confident in what I did, because there's a lot to learn. And you're learning about how people live and how they want to live in spaces, the distances between things, what makes things comfortable. That's all part of biophilia. Attack for a second here. I'm sure you're familiar with at least two of the images that I've got on the screen here. On the left, we've got the Apple Store, and they're all over the world, but this is the one in Vancouver. Now, Apple, and a lot of the companies like Apple, use technology to grab your attention and to understand how you're thinking. Not the way that you think you're thinking, but they're using technology, eye tracking software, skin sensors, your skin. People go into these stores and onto their websites, and they sort of judge their reactions using this technology. They're walking through their store 100 times, thousands of times, using this software to really fine-tune it so that they can grab your attention. So that, in fact, I actually really like the Apple stores. I think they're really comfortable to be in. But the reason they're that way is because they've been designed. It's very, very intentional, and it's not by accident. The quality of the wood, the spacing, the lighting, the type of glass. It's all designed, and it's designed using software. Instagram, Meta. I love Instagram. I am addicted, yes. They're using eye tracking software, as you all know, probably, to see your reactions and to actually, it's part of the attention economy, to see how long they can track you and keep you on their sites. They're also using that same, very similar technology to what Apple's using. Now there's another one, Dragonfly. I just came across it. It's really interesting. I was hoping that I could use it in my practice, but it's an artificial intelligence software that allows you to see where people will look next, and to see how products in particular, and maybe spaces, can be designed so that they maximize their commercial output. These are commercial firms, they're technology firms. They're using technology to get your dollars and to get your attention And we're not even using it yet as architects. So on the other side of this coin, going back 1,000 years, there's 3 pictures up here. This is Siena on the left. It's a little town, a hilltop town in Italy. I love it. If anyone's been there, it's just good for you. If you haven't been there yet, try and make it there. It's a beautiful place. What makes it so beautiful, and we don't even understand why, maybe deeply rooted inside of us, what makes it so beautiful is that it's so human. You walk around that town and you feel like everything is just the right scale. The streets are the right width, the distances between stores are the right width, the campanile, the big opening in the center, it's this beautiful 100-meter width. It's just the perfect size for people. It's a human-centered town. Now, at the center of that town, up in the corner of that image, you can see that there's a Duomo, a church, a Catholic church, symbol of power, is part of that. The second image is from the Imperial Palace in Kyoto, other side of the world. Very, very different type of architecture, very different type of culture. 1,000 years old, 500 years old. It's been going forever and ever and ever. The Imperial Palace has gardens. It's got water. It's got planting. It's got low-scale architecture. This is a symbol of power from 500 years ago, but it's very, very human-centered. It's very approachable. And it remains relevant today because it is so beautiful, and we're attracted to it. People then, the architects, the designers, I didn't even think they had architects back then. I think they just had craftsmen and really smart people. They understood the value of a human-centered world. Guess where I'm going next? I'm going to Chicago, Sears Tower, glass towers, the environments that we're building today. The intention of the architects and the designers is to create a sense of awe, to overwhelm you. So be aware when you go to these spaces that it's glass, it's tall, it's powerful. Do you want to go there and nestle in? No. These are intimidating spaces, and they're intended to be intimidating. And we're getting more and more and more accustomed to spaces and places and cities that are built to intimidate us. They're not good for us. And what's happening is that there's this field of study called neuroaesthetics, neurological aesthetics. And what's happening in this field, people are realizing that places and spaces have an effect on us. And they have a long-term effect. They wear you down. They make you anxious. When you're confronted with glass towers every single day, sure, you can endure it for a little while. Stress is good for the body. We've all heard that. But is it good day in and day out, every day of your life? Okay, that's biophilia, a primer from my perspective. I'm going to talk about buildings and climate change for a moment. On this graph, you'll see the impact, greenhouse gases, of various sectors in our world. So it's very simplified, but the purple represents transportation. I drive a Tesla. We think we're doing a good job eliminating cars and buses and so forth and using electricity instead of gas. But that's 22% of the greenhouse gases. Now let's think maybe if everyone drives an electric car, maybe that might be reduced by 5 or 10%. Look at the big green chunk right there. That's buildings. 2 parts. 1, the use of energy in a building, 28% of all greenhouse gases. The gases that go in to heat this building, the gases that go to fire the turbines that charge our buildings with electricity, that's the 28%. 11% is for the construction of a building. So that's what goes in, all the trucks and the materials and everything to drive to the site to build the thing. So the construction industry and architecture has a lot to account for, but we don't really hear about it very much. It kind of gets buried because it's easy to think about cars, and it's easy to think, quite frankly, to pick on industry too. 30%, we didn't talk about that one. We'll leave that one out of it for the moment. But industry, you know, all industry counts for 30%. If you add the 28 and 11, that's 39% of all greenhouse gases come from buildings. That's what I need to tackle in my practice. Going back in time a little bit, 1977, Harold Orr, an architect in Saskatchewan, built this house. It's called the Saskatchewan Conservation House. It's an ugly little thing. Well, it depends on your perspective, I suppose. It was built as the first passive house in the world, in Canada. So this is amazing. It had solar array on the top there, south-facing glass, overhangs, and these kind of nifty little panels that would drop down to shield the windows when it got really cold. It's really cold in Regina. But this house survived without heating, with natural light in the house. It did have electricity for light, but it was the first, call it passive house, off-grid house. It didn't need electricity. This is at a time in 1977, and I remember this, and I don't think there are many people who do, when we had something called the OPEC oil crisis, and this is when people really knuckled down on efficiency. Unfortunately, gas prices dropped, oil prices dropped, and we forgot about this, and it went sort of as a relic to history. Didn't surface for another 20 years. Germany saw what Canada had done, and Germany needs to be energy independent. Germany, if you look at it geographically, is entirely surrounded by countries and doesn't have its own oil resources and can produce its own electricity, but it needs to have energy independence, especially when you have non-friendly neighbors around it like Russia, where it gets most of its oil from. So Germans, as Germans often do, took it upon themselves to quantify and to create a set of rules around what it would take to make a house virtually energy-free. There's 5 things, and you don't have to remember them. I'll just go through them real quick. Really good insulation, thick insulation, much thicker than we were ever used to. Good windows, triple-pane windows. Ventilation system, so we don't suffocate. We're exchanging the air all the time. It's the lungs of the house. Air tightness, no leaks. You open your jacket up, doesn't matter how good a jacket is, you're going to get cold. Thermal bridge reduction, beams that go from inside to out. So those are five things. If we can control those things, we can make a house and a building, they call it passive house, but it's actually all buildings, energy-free. So here's a little graph showing an old building up on the left-hand side, a typical house. So this is a house that might be built today. And what I want you to pay attention to there is the 3 colored bars or chunks underneath each of the little house figures. The top one is the household use, so this is all the appliances. That's the amount of energy that goes into running the appliances and all of the computers in a house day to day. The second thing is hot water heating. And the third thing is heating and cooling. So that big chunk underneath there, you can see what a sizable chunk it is, especially in the typical house in the old building. How much energy is consumed by a building? We think about that. That's where we want to target. If we can target that reduction, we can get to what's called a passive house. By those 5 principles that I talked about before, reduce, 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 we can get down to the passive house. That's the yellow band. It's a 90% reduction in our energy use in a house. This fascinates me because I just think it's so obvious. It's so smart. Not so easy to do. Next step, so you can see how all of the bands underneath the passive house have been reduced down to the bare minimum. The next thing to do, put some solar panels on your roof, and now you've got a house that is net zero or energy positive, contributes back to the grid. So this is incredible. Like, we're here now, and then you can see the cost of ownership. I think I just lost my button. The cost of ownership being reduced all the way down to minus 25%. So that's when a house starts to contribute back to the grid. Okay, where did I start on this journey? 2010. I was, probably recognize this if anyone's been to Whistler. This is the Lost Lake Loop passive house. and it's where the cross-country skiing is going. And I was up there with my daughter and my wife, and we were skiing around and came across this in 2010. I thought, what a magnificent little building. What is this? And I started to learn about this. This is from Austria, so it was the Austrian pavilion, and they served Glühwein and pretzels and things like this in the little pavilion next to it. And it was a great little building. And I walked inside and I thought, oh my gosh, this really resonates with me. Something about this building feels really, really, really good. So I started to look into it, started to think about passive. I'd always been interested in high-performance buildings and energy reduction, but this kind of nailed it for me. It was really, it put it all together. So long story short, fast forward 6 years, second child, third property, we'd flipped a few houses, and my wife, I looked at my wife and I said, what do you think about, I know we're kind of settling in and trying to make a family here, but what do you think if we sold everything and bought a property and we built this house of the future? Because we have children now. Wouldn't it be fun to think, not just fun, wouldn't it be important to think about how they might grow up in an environment where they could be proud of it? It's something part of the future. So I said, well, I have this idea. You want to build a passive house? And God bless my wife. She said, fantastic idea. I love it. Let's sell everything, move on. Let's go do this. So I went to work, spent a few months drawing a house as I do. I kind of knuckle down Saturday morning, nice and quiet in the office, and I knuckle down and I get to work on drawing. And I draw. I think passive. And there's going to be a connection here, you guys. Don't worry. I start to abandon my ideas of good design and start to pull in those ideas of passive, that five points of the passive house. And I come up with a house that was truly horrendous. And I show it to Mary, and she looks at me and says, can we hire another architect, Cedric? And I'm like, okay, Mary, no, trust me, I got this. So it took me 3 hours. I came up with a few sketches for her. I said, this is what will work on this property. And she says, okay, fine. I don't completely get it, but I trust you. Get to work. And so we did. Fast forward to today. This is my daughter, Anali, she was born when we sold the house, and this is the house today. It's completely passive, and it's net zero. So it has 30 solar panels on the roof that contribute back into the grid. A few more pictures of it. My daughter's learning piano. We have a solar heated pool. And there we are, next to the creek. And I'm going to wrap this up because I probably have gone over time, but I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to remind you that the point of this discussion was really to say that there's great joy in the duality between what we know is right in our hearts and our sort of lizard brain primordial sense of good and right and beauty, and combining that with the technology of today. So I'm excited about the future. I think there's great opportunities, and as we progress in our practice, we're going to be using more and more of this technology to really nail what feels good and what looks good. Thank you for your time.